Plea deal? It looked early in the week like they were going to do a plea deal. Hot shark summer. Just swimming among people this summer. Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
Okay. Hot shark summer. This week of the 20th of July, it was reported on NBC that there have been sharks just swimming among people this summer because it's El Nino, it's warm, a hot shark summer. So there have been a lot of shark sightings, but not particularly many more attacks. Should we be worried? And in general, is this sort of shark attack thing overblown, just a holdover from the whole Jaws movie?
Okay, so here's what I said. Shark attacks are very rare. Sharks are always there. Ocean's a very big place, and there's millions of sharks. Humans destroy way more sharks than sharks have ever attacked humans, and it's not close. Less than 100 shark attacks last year that were reported that I could see. Millions of sharks are killed and harvested and eaten, right? So humans are a much bigger threat to sharks than sharks will ever be to humans, because humans have the ability to kill sharks from a distance, and a shark has to get up close and personal to eat you. And so there's an easy way to avoid that. Don't go near the shark, right? If you don't go in the water, you're not going to get eaten by a shark. It's not going to jump out of the water and be like, no. Sharks are in the ocean. But I will say sharks are an apex predator, so always be worried about sharks if you're in the open ocean, right? That they can smell blood from very far away, and just don't act as if they're not a threat. They're always a threat. They eat things. They eat animals. They eat people, right? They're carnivores, and the thing with all the teeth, it's gonna munch if it's gonna eat if it's given the opportunity. So don't give it the opportunity. But then the last thing I was gonna say is so many things in life, the worry far exceeds the risk, right? So this argument could also be applied to flying on a plane. That the amount of problems compared to the total volume of possibilities is way lower compared to almost anything else in life. There's a much greater risk of getting hurt just getting into a car and driving anywhere than you'll ever encounter a shark, right? Going on a sidewalk, way higher risk of getting hit by a car or some kind of injury than getting bit by a shark.
As an aggregate over the lifetime, sure. I mean,
plenty of people never go to the ocean. Like, there's plenty of statistics to show that a great number of people never travel farther than 100 miles from where they're born. And so some people go to the ocean for sure. Absolutely. Millions of people, billions of people go to the ocean. But in terms of the actual risk of people getting bit by sharks, really not that high. I will say for the visibility thing, that's actually a function of our ability to see sharks improving, right? So think about it, that there's more drones flying around, there's more satellite imagery, there's better photography technology and video technology, that we can see sharks at a greater depth. As in, the sharks were always there, but our ability to see them wasn't as good. But now that we can see them better, it seems like there's more sharks. Does that make sense?
It definitely does. The sharks are showing up.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Jaws the movie and Jaws the sequels, many sequels, did have an obvious effect on how scared people are of sharks. But also there's other movies. There's that Megalodon movie with a really big shark. And there's Shark Week on TV where they...
Which is next week, by the way. Although, who knows when we'll have this one out.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think people do get afraid of predators because it's something that's stronger than us, right? So, like, killer whales are scary because they can... Have you ever seen that video of the killer whale exploding a sunfish? Where...
Yes.
Yeah, and it runs right at the fish and the fish goes kaboom. Sharks are similar. They're pretty strong. The one thing to know about sharks, at least I know this for great white sharks, is that if a great white shark gets killed by a killer whale, it sends out this like biological signal to all the other sharks within however much distance to just, skedaddle on out of there. And so if a shark dies in an area, there's a decent chance that a lot of the other sharks will just run away, right? That they're not necessarily going to stick around to find out what just killed that shark. And so I think part of the thing is that sharks are opportunistic hunters, right? That they'll, if they think they can eat something, they will try. So the main thing is just to not provide that opportunity. If you're going to swim in the ocean, swim with an area that's closed off by a net or something, that so the shark can't get in. But swimming in the open ocean always is a risk, obviously, right?
So, to conclude, sharks not as deadly as cars. Maybe somebody should make a horror movie or a thriller movie about like a truck that becomes sentient and like starts running people over. That would be better directed alarm if we must have alarm, and I feel that we must have a degree of alarm. Cool. Mangione?
Sure, my answers haven't really changed from the last time we talked about this, but I have a lot I wrote down.
Yeah, so in preparing for this podcast, I wrote on the top of the show notes, I note how much of the news is things we've already covered or for similar events like earthquakes and the quality of buildings, things going on in Iran, fires, and we have covered Mangione as well.
This is a little different because it's changed, obviously, from the last time we talked. But I don't know, we can talk about this I have a lot I wrote down.
Yeah, so the news sort of did a hem and haw about how, oh, it looked early in the week like they were going to do a plea deal, but now that's fallen away. Whereas they lead with, plea deal? It's like there was going to be, but now not so much. Have I asked the question of whether he's likely to get a fair trial before? That sounds like a similar...
I think so, and my response to that is yes, he likely will. Compared to your average defendant, the answer is yes, because he clearly has more than just a public defender as legal representation, that he's got a high-end lawyer as a defense attorney with a lot of and also that the voir dire process, the one that determines who to put on a jury, is actually really comprehensive. They've got a lot of research and study into making it work. And so it's unlikely in my mind that he'll suddenly get a jury that just is completely biased against him. There is a real process involved in making sure that the jury is impartial, unbiased, and they've got a lot of tools to do that. They've got questionnaires, they've got screening. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on before you even get to the voir dire stage that would help to ensure that the trial is indeed fair, right? And fair in this case just means that he's got a jury that will listen to the evidence and then make a decision like all juries do based off what the evidence presented and the arguments presented by the prosecution and the defense. It would be, it would be unfair if the thumb was pressed on the scale or something, but it doesn't look like that's the case here. They've gotten a bunch of stuff thrown out. There's been a whole process, right? Some evidence isn't admissible. Some of the charges were dropped. It would be one thing if the deck looked completely stacked against him and there was just no process at all. But this looks fair, right? He's confronting his accusers. He gets to see the evidence against him, and there's a lot of evidence. He's got legal representation, right? It's not like for any moment of this that he's got no opportunity to present an adequate defense, right? Unfair, in my mind, is a little bit different. It's stuff like what happened with Comey and Letitia James in their first trials, where they had a U.S. attorney that apparently wasn't properly appointed, so couldn't have actually brought the charges, or some of the stuff where there's an argument that was made that some of the evidence presented in the grand jury may have been fishy. It's like that. That's where the unfair question rises in my mind, where like the process itself is so mercurial, right? Because usually grand jury testimony is hidden. The stuff that's presented there is kept away from it's under seal. But that is mercurial and so strange in the process of how it even got to that point that it raises serious questions. So in the case of, for instance, Comey and Letitia James, again, I think about that because it's ongoing, where the U.S. attorney like resigned, right? Instead of doing it. He's like, there's no evidence here to make it happen. So he either resigned or got fired. And then they put in a different attorney. And then for the Comey case that's ongoing now, like the lead prosecutor just backed out of the case. And so the question is like, why? What's going like? What do they know that we, the public, don't know that screams don't do this, right? Like, how does somebody who spent a very long time going to law school, getting the bona fides and credentials to become the lead prosecutor on a big federal case decide not going to do it, right? How do you get to that point? That's one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe there's a there. Like when all those lawyers quit in the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office, for instance, because the allegation is that they were told to investigate Renee Good's wife instead of investigate what happened. Those are the things where it's like, what's going on there, right? Here, this is a trial that's been going on for 2 years. It's a very publicly visible event. Obviously, unless people live under a rock, they've heard about it because
Right.
there's a huge nationwide manhunt for him. The question just becomes, are jurors able to adequately look at the evidence, make a decision based off of what they see and hear from the evidence in an impartial manner? Can they fairly evaluate the events as they happen and then make a decision that can be agreed upon?
Yeah, so you don't think that any of them are going to have ended up saying to themselves beforehand, any of the 12, I presume, jurors, are going to end up having said to themselves beforehand, he shot him, and I know it, because I saw the video, and I'm going to find guilty no matter what the trial. Or, alternatively, that none of them are going to be like, he was a Robin Hood, he was a hero, he sought to stick it to the rich, and I'm going to find him not guilty. You don't think that'll happen? You don't think that'll end up happening?
Who knows? Yeah. This is one of those things where the future is unpredictable, right? Who knows what's going to happen, really? I don't think that's what's going to happen here because the evidence is pretty damning and pretty unambiguous, right? That if the allegations hold true of what the sequence of events are, he planned in cold blood to do this thing. It happened. He got caught. That's the allegations as I see them. If you just look at those facts alone, serious crime happened. Very serious crime. The only question, so going back to something like a plea deal, in my mind, the only reason he'd accept a plea deal is if it was something that was less than life in prison, right? Because there's state charges and there's federal charges. Both of those charges carry very heavy sentences if he's found guilty. And so in terms of a plea deal, it's something like what happened in Idaho with that guy who murdered the 4 college students. He pled guilty eventually because they took the death penalty off the table, is my understanding of what happened there. And so it's something similar here. It's pretty unambiguous, again, allegedly, that Mangione did this thing, right? He's on camera. They found a bunch of stuff, right? It just seems, look, I am a lay observer. I am not a lawyer. I don't know. Maybe there's some defense out there that he can make that he'll walk away from that. I'm skeptical. But if he accepts a plea deal, it's because they offer him a better deal than what he thinks he could get at trial, right? Because there's the potential at trial of life in prison, right? Spending the rest of his days staring out from either a federal or a state prison. I'm not entirely sure how that would work. Would he serve in a state prison, then go to federal prison? Would the sentences be at the same time? I don't even know that whole thing because he's got both state charges and federal charges. And so that's a whole thing. But yeah, in terms of a plea deal, it would just be that. They offered him better than life in prison.
Sure.
But was there anything else you wanted to talk about for this
bullet point?
For this topic? I wrote a whole bunch of stuff down.
Yeah. Do you think he would not go for an insanity defense or get his lawyers to not go for an insanity defense because this would involve an admission that his priorities in the killing had been insane? Do you think I think that actually sums up the extensive thing I wrote, more or less.
So here's what I wrote down for that in terms of the insanity defense, is that for usually my understanding of the insanity defense is that the person has to not understand in the moment the consequences of their actions, right? In order to win an insanity defense, they effectively have to argue that they had no idea that there would be any negative repercussions from doing what they did. And the problem I see for Mangione's case, for approaching that defense, again, I'm not a lawyer. problem I see for Mangione's case is that this was planned well in advance. And
Yeah.
after the fact, he didn't run screaming into the street, some crazy something, and then just get caught, right? No, he made an active, deliberate effort to run and to hide. That doesn't scream insanity to me. That screams somebody planned to do a thing and then created a plan to get away with it, right? That doesn't that doesn't scream to me that he doesn't understand the consequences of what he did, right? It screams to me that he understood the consequences of what he did and wanted to avoid facing those consequences by trying to run away and hide, right? Sanity is it's a very extreme kind of defense because it requires proving essentially that you had a temporary break with reality in the moment and that you were so overcome with emotion that it just happened or whatever. That there are very specific things that have to be proven to win an insanity defense. I don't think that's there here, in part because I'm pretty sure he's been tested to see if he's mentally competent to stand trial, and he probably has been. I feel like the circumstances here are such that it's provable that he's not insane and that he wasn't insane at the time. And
Hmm.
it's also provable that he's not insane now because he had the wherewithal to get a very expensive, very experienced lawyer as a defense attorney. It's one thing if he was trying to defend himself, right? Or if he wasn't using any of the tools available to a defendant to try and have even a marginal defense, even a token defense with a public defender or something. No, there's been a very obvious steps made to present himself in such a way to reduce the. I know this seems strange to talk about, but things like getting a haircut, dressing in a certain way, presenting himself in a certain manner to try and mollify the jury's impression of him, to make him look more, I don't know, sympathetic, less of a violent, outrageous criminal that committed a murder in cold blood, right? That there are
Hmm.
strategies involved with presenting a defense that are about the social perception, right? The wearing a suit, wearing clothes that are clean, shaving, washing your face, having clean cut hair. There's a whole long list of things that people do to try and improve their chances of winning at trial or reducing or mitigating the sentencing at trial to try and
Yeah.
improve the impression of the jury. And from my perspective, it sure looks like Mangione's making more than a non-zero effort to actually maybe not win, but certainly to at least not lose badly in terms of the defense. And so, at least in that respect, I would say that the insanity defense isn't going to fly. It's not going to work because it's a really high bar to prove it. And that bar, again, not a lawyer, but that bar, in my opinion, hasn't been met. I said the last thing I said is when we're talking about the movement that Mangione was trying to make, it was a bad idea from the start. If you want change in the healthcare system, it has to be systemic change. It has to be through the democratic process because that's how you get durable change. Because you have so
Yeah.
many, we're talking about a fifth of the US economy. You've got so many people involved in this thing, either making money from it or depending on the money that's made from it, that it's almost impossible to fundamentally change the healthcare system to create more access for people unless you do it through the political process. And it has to be a huge effort, something on the level of the federal highway system, because you're changing virtually every facet of the healthcare system to make it so that people can actually get access to healthcare in an affordable way. And the only way to do that is you have to get all the people involved in the healthcare system to agree to the same rules, right? Because they're all competing with each other, right? And they all have to make enough money to justify
Right.
the huge expense to even work there, right? It takes years and years of school to become a doctor. The US has, if I remember the numbers correctly, it takes even more time in the US through residency and schooling and licensure than most other places in the world to become a medical professional in almost any medical profession, dentistry, vision, your general doctor, surgeon. It takes a very long time and it costs a lot of money, right? It costs a house pretty much in terms of the amount of money it costs, unless you have a scholarship, and those are rare. It costs a lot of money, right? And in order to gain a return on that investment, you have to make enough money to pay off those loans and live your life, right? To be able to afford a place to live, right? Food, shelter, clothes, right? All the things, right? You can't pay $2,000, $3,000 a month in student loans, and also be able to afford rent and a car and food. And the barrier to entry is so high just to get into the job, but the pay is so low that nobody wants to do the job.
Right.
You get a real problem, right? Which is that nobody gets access to healthcare because the doctors would all just leave, right? They'd all go somewhere else in the world that would pay them enough money that they could live a life, right? Because people respond to incentives, and the system is built now to incentivize doctors to do the job and get paid to do the job. So if you make a system, if you try to reform that system at a bare minimum, you have to make sure that people either get their medical school pretty much paid for entirely, right? That they sign some kind of
Yeah.
agreement where the people would pay for them to go to school, and then they get to get paid money without facing the constant omnipresent threat of student loans.
I think that's a great idea. I think that this is one of your better ideas. In fact,
It's not my idea. It was Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon, right? I don't know if that's his middle name, but Nixon.
it is. You got his middle name right.
Yeah, he's the one who proposed that idea for rural medicine, right? That what the doctors would do is they'd get their medical school paid for. There's already a model for this in the U.S. government. It's called ROTC. Have you ever heard of the Reserve Officer Training Corps? ROTC.
Yes.
The agreement there is you get your school paid for, and then you serve in the military for however many years the requirement is. Same deal here. We could do the same exact model down to the dollar amount of training doctors, training nurses, training every medical professional you need, telling them we will pay full freight, right? If you meet the requirements, you pass the test, you get the entry exam requirements, we will pay 100%. And you promise to serve as a doctor in where we need the doctors, right? In the rural areas, in the hospitals, you name it. That kind of thing I think would work, right? There's plenty of smart people in the country who, given the opportunity, I'm sure would study to be a doctor or a veterinarian or a dentist or a vision person and do it, right? Why wouldn't they? It's free money, especially
Yeah.
if it's tax free. If you get it and you complete it and you meet the requirements, you're a doctor. Who doesn't want to? Like, there's plenty of people who want to be doctors, who want to be, like,
Mhm.
plenty of people all around the
Yeah.
world, no question, right? You just need to get the incentives right. But what's very clear is to get that kind of change, you have to get everybody invested in the idea. So you need a leadership. You need you need a John F. Kennedy saying, "We're going to the moon."
Yeah.
We don't have the technology to go to the moon. We have no idea how we're going to get to the moon. But you know what we're going to do? We're going to go to the moon, and we'll figure it out on the way, right? We'll invest everything we need to figure out the science and the math and the expertise and all the logistics stuff, the resources. Who cares? We're going to the moon, right? That's what you need. You need an Eisenhower or Kennedy. You need Eisenhower. We're going to build a massive highway system across the entire country. I don't care if you don't like it. We're going to do it. I went all over
Mhm.
Europe. Europe had really bad roads. We couldn't travel with our tanks. That sucked. We had to figure out how to get from point A to point B to win the war. It was tough. I didn't like it. So the US, which is a very big country, needs roads that are big enough and strong enough to bring a tank or a truck from one end to the other end. The only way you get there is a federal highway system. Same kind of deal here. We don't like having lots of sick people declare bankruptcy because they can't afford their medical expenses, and so they get sicker and they die. So the way you improve that is you make medical care accessible and affordable to everybody. How do you do that? You have to make system-wide change, right? It has to be something that everybody agrees is, one, necessary, and two, can happen. And politics is the art of the possible. Look what happened in New York just recently with the Democratic Socialists getting a clean sweep, right? Mamdani won as mayor, and then he endorsed a bunch of candidates, and they all won. What were their
Mhm.
platforms? Their platforms were things like lower rent, lower food prices, universal health care, universal child care, like very basic, straightforward stuff. And they went to the voters and said, "We'll deliver this to you. We will get you these
Right.
things. Vote us in." Why did your centrist Democrats and your status quo people lose? Because they didn't have any kind of message like, "We will actually do this for you." It was more of the, like, gradual incremental change. Got to do stuff a little bit at the time. It's like, no, we need, like, actual people who will deliver actual results. It's not
Yeah.
make the lobbyists happy. It's deliver results for people
Yeah.
in this time of extreme need.
Or they advocated not for doing much at all, but merely talking about how egregious the other side is. You have to have an affirmative plan in order to get elected.
I'll say this much for Trump. Trump said the right things. I'll lower the price of eggs. I'll lower the price of milk. I'll lower the price. He knew what to say. He knew the message. It's just that he hasn't delivered on that message. That's what happened. So where the Democrats, I think, fail a little bit is they're too nice, right? That they won't necessarily say things that are so constantly on message as to persuade the voters that it will actually happen. They operate in the realm of what they think is possible now, as opposed to trying to deliver a better future by. Look, I know this is a little not complicated. I might be being overly critical, but essentially that the reason someone like Mamdani won compared to why the more mainstream Democrats are losing is that you set the bar of what's possible really high, and then you try and accomplish as close to it as you can. Part of the problem with how the mainstream Democrats talk about things is that they set the bar, like they limit it to low or the middle, and they don't reach for the stars. Like John F. Kennedy reached for literally the stars, right? It's the criticism I have of actually Obamacare. They didn't have a public option. They could have.
Yeah.
They didn't. They foreclosed that possibility to try and compromise with the Republicans, and we've seen what happened. That the Republicans tried over and over to vote down Obamacare, and it's like, no, the Democrats had every chamber, the House, they had the Senate, they had the presidency. That was the time. That was the moment, right? That was the time to make it happen and to make it durable. Now we're left with this real mess, right? Where they didn't extend the Obamacare subsidies. And now people are facing eye-wateringly high insurance premiums. That's not great. Nobody wants that.
Right.
Yeah, I would say the way I would characterize it with your standard Democrat these days is there's the emphasis on the palatable message in terms of what can we get a coalition, which includes lobbyists, to agree to. And we're palatable and Trump, he's impalatable. And that's true, but it's going to be true whether they say it or not. And a better thing to do, as you point out, is to say, look at that star. That's our destination, buddy.
Yeah.
Mondays with Mike.